Hello and welcome to UC Today. My name's David Dungay. We are back for another big UC news show. Welcome to everyone joining me today. I hope you're all well.
How are you,
Great.
Dave? Blair and Evan?
Good, thank you.
Nice
Let's
to
go
see
around the room.
everyone.
We've got Evan Kirstel, we've got Blair Pleasant, and we've got Zeus Kerravala. Welcome, everyone. We've got some fantastic news to share with everyone today. Let's jump straight into that first news story. We're going to be talking about Cisco and Cisco Webex and what's going on over there. In the latest piece of news, we've seen another round of layoffs hit the news wires. This comes off the back of some layoffs we saw at the end of last year. And then another round in January just this year. And that follows a bit of a downturn in revenue in terms of their collaboration units, although overall revenues of Cisco have been fairly positive. The question mark here to me is what can we make of this latest round of layoffs? And is Cisco approaching the UC market, and especially when it comes to the bundling of those products, are they doing that in the right way? What does everyone think? Should we start with Zeus? What are your thoughts on this latest round of layoffs?
Yeah, I think the term layoffs a little incorrect here. While there were layoffs within certain groups, Chuck Robbins, our CEO, talked with us in the last earnings call. They are doing a reallocation of headcount and putting jobs in different places based on where they see growth. And so if you look at, they've been staffing up quite a bit in the areas of security and networking, where particularly in security, where I think everybody at Cisco looks at security as a big needle moving opportunity. They're a minority share player there. It's a massive market that's highly fragmented. And so if they can execute on that right, there's a lot of upside. And now, obviously, if you're going to keep headcount relatively flat, Chuck did say it's possible that you could see a slight net increase. But if you're going to staff up one area, that means you have to reduce headcount in another area. And collaboration is one of those areas where they've reduced the headcount. And when I talked to G2 about that, who runs security and collaboration, he said, look, they've done a lot of the work. When he joined, he's very clear that Webex was behind in a lot of areas. They staffed up, they retooled the product, they did a lot of development work. They redid the back end. And now that a lot of that work's done and it comes down to execution, they've obviously changed their strategy a lot over the last couple of years as well. They're trying to use Microsoft as a tailwind versus trying to take the whole pie there. And so with the change in strategy and I think with a lot of the heavy lifting being done, they can reduce the headcount on Webex and increase it in other areas. If you look at the overall net revenue for collab was down, and they talk about that every quarter, where there's a net decline in a lot of the old hardware business and a lot of the on-prem, and then there's this increase in Webex. I don't think we've seen the bottom of that yet, though. I'm not sure when that comes, but clearly they're transitioning that business, and that's created this net downward effect. But I think and then we are at their fiscal year end, right? And so they generally do a headcount rationalization at fiscal year end, because they always buy companies every quarter. They get a lot of redundant people. And then when July, August rolls around and the new fiscal year starts, they correct that headcount. And so this is typically very seasonal, but this year they had the added change of corporate structure where they're trying to beef up other areas.
So it's a good time to be a security expert.
Yeah, frankly, this is something all big companies should be doing. They should always be looking at their headcount and making sure they have the right people in the right areas to take advantage of growth opportunities, right? If you're not doing that, that's ultimately what gets companies in trouble, where they've got too many people staffed up in areas that aren't growing, and they don't have the right people in the right areas, and then they suffer long term for it. So I think this should be, the reallocation to headcount should be something that's standard practice at large companies.
So let's move on to our second news story of the day, and that is following on from Microsoft Inspire. We were all waiting for this event just a few weeks ago to really hear what was going to happen around Microsoft's latest product, Copilot. They did announce a few features around the Copilot and some of its capabilities around Teams phone and chat with summarizations and incorporating email summarizations as well into those. So really, really exciting stuff from Microsoft here. But the big talking point was the price. $30 a month, which in the grand scheme of things might not sound like a lot, but when you compare it against business standard, which is coming in around $12.50 a month, it is quite the price jump. So what do our panel think here? Let's go to Blair first. Blair, what are your thoughts?
I think it's pretty expensive, but it's also a new technology, new product. And, we see this all the time. Prices start high, they have to pay a lot for, the chips and, some things that are, relatively new. So the pricing is going to be starting off high. So I think we're going to see the typical thing where things start a little high and then prices are going to drop down. But for now, I think with that, $30 price, it's going to be pretty limited as far as the number of customers that are really going to jump in. I definitely see price decreases down the pike, but for now, I think the number of customers who can jump in, it's going to be large enterprises. I mean, it's great technology, and I think a lot of companies are really going to be clamoring for it. But that's going to be the large enterprises that can afford it for a small portion of their workers. But SMBs, I think they're going to be priced out for quite a while.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to SMBs, I mean, I'm a small business owner myself, and I already use a dozen different generative AI tools, some of which are freemium, others, even OpenAI is $20 a month, sort of all you can eat. And so, we have access to quite a few tools already. It's really that global 2000, as Blair said, enterprise that can't just, use freemium tools off the shelf and kind of play with, existing apps so easily. So they're going to be really tied to a small number of providers like Microsoft. So what do you think, Zeus?
Well, it is expensive, and it really comes down to, can they demonstrate enough value from it that it's something that people have to have. I do think we all, Microsoft, not that they've reached that, they hate the M word, but that near monopoly like status, as far as Teams goes with, relative to Office share. I do think you might start seeing them have prices creep up in other areas too to capitalize on that. They've got customers somewhat locked into it, and so this is the time to see what customers are willing to pay. If they don't get enough pushback, or if they get a lot of pushback, like you mentioned, Blair, you may see them take prices down. But this all comes down to, if it saves your knowledge worker a couple of hours, 3, 4, 5 hours a week, then $30 a month really isn't all that much when you think about how much people get paid and how much more productivity you could have. If there's a lot of heavy lifting and things aren't well integrated, and it just like with a lot of Microsoft tools, there's a lot of user frustration, then you're likely not to see the uptake. And so this really comes down to the potential's there, but I think it's got to deliver on a lot of the promise. And let's face it, with Microsoft, a lot of their early release stuff really hasn't done that.
But I think with Copilot, we're going to see a big learning curve, just figuring out how to use it and how to really benefit from it. So yeah, it might be able to save a lot of time, but it's going to take people a long time just to figure out, because some of its capabilities, how can you really use it? So yeah, it can do summaries and, things like that, but going beyond that, where are the real use cases? And it's going to take a while for people to really identify how they can use it, to make them more productive and efficient.
Yeah, you could argue that it's interesting, all these, Evan, you mentioned all those tools you use. Are we more efficient today, or are we just using more tools? And, because while Teams was supposed to create a reduction in email, people send you Teams messages and then they send you emails. And so it's like you got twice as many messages now coming in. And I do think, Blair, to your point, there has to be some kind of almost rethink of how people work and understanding of what tools to use when, because it seems like all we've done is throw more and more tools at the user and let the user try and figure out how to use it. And then when you couple that with the big price tag, that's when you get a lot of pushback, right?
And I think initially there's also going to be kind of a lack of, I don't know if trust is the right word, but so let's say Copilot is doing a meeting summarization. Well, I want to check it and make sure that it summarized the right things and it didn't, miss out on important things. So it's going to be, using the Copilot and then checking it. So that's going to actually take more time. So I think until we really feel comfortable with, yes, it's doing a good job and it's doing the things I need, it's actually going to take more time on the part of the workers, because it's going to be, human in the loop, in addition. So it's going to take some time until we're really comfortable using this type of technology and getting the value from it.
I just want to know, am I ever going to have to create a PowerPoint presentation again? Can we finally put a stake in the PowerPoint design? And
it's a good point Blair brought up. I was actually at AWS's AI Summit yesterday, and they announced a product called Health Scribe, which is a health transcription service. And I asked Matt Wood, the person presenting to analysts, like, is this something that actually is going to take the human out of the loop? Because there's so much industry lingo in healthcare, not only at a healthcare level, but also a lot of times within the individual facility. And he said, clearly it's not going to know everything about every organization. So you still have to have a person check the information. So from that standpoint, have you really gained anything? And I suppose years and years from now, we might trust the systems enough to not check things. But their initial use case of it actually will have the documents and things actually attached to the transcription, so you can read it and then go, manually check it yourself. But to me, that's solving, I guess it's a step along the way, but ultimately that does create a lot of heavy lifting that perhaps wasn't even there before if you just used a transcription service, right? Yeah.
I think the other interesting thing around this is data and security of that data as well. I'm hearing this come up more and more at the moment in this AI world we're living in. I wonder, are you, either of you three, coming across people with their concerns around the data, the privacy of their data when it comes to using tools like Copilot? Are you coming across that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, most institutions now are not allowing free use and access to ChatGPT and other tools, and including blocking, the firewall when employees want to try to use it in the office because of data protection and potential leak of data to these tools. So, particularly in regulated industries, it's a huge problem. What they want is generative AI tools based on their data. So like the Bloomberg GPT, not Chat GPT. So I think this is, an interesting development for enterprise, but, what's next is, a more secure, reliable source of truth versus a generalized large language model.
Yeah, what you need is a curated data set. And I've used that analogy with Bloomberg before, where if I want to know the weather or if the Red Sox won last night or whatever, I can ask Google, right? And, go to that. But if I'm going to look for some kind of legal precedent as a lawyer, I'm not using Google, I'm using LexisNexis, right? If I'm a financial, person, I'm going to use Bloomberg or Dow Jones, not Google, right? And so similarly, workers just can't rely on ChatGPT and believe it's the, it's the source of truth. That curated data set becomes important. But then, you're right, from a company perspective, how much of your sensitive data do you put in there? Do you trust it? Where is it stored? Is it localized, right? Things like that. And so there's a lot of moving parts here that I think a lot of organizations haven't even begun to think of before we can take this type of technology and actually apply it to our corporate data. Never mind just all the different sources of data there are. Like in our space, you think of the term customer experience, right? There's contact center, there's CRM, there's web analytic tools, there's, there's purchase intent. There's all kinds of data that's really not tied together very well. And so if we start applying these AI tools to a limited data set, we're only going to get limited insights.
One of my favorite topics, especially when it comes to UC, is user training and adoption. And for a while, things were kind of quiet on that end, but I think it's time to really revisit that, because I think with all this, generative AI, ChatGPT, workers really need to be trained on how to use these technologies appropriately, safely, so that they're not bringing in unauthorized things in the workplace. They're not using public ChatGPT and sharing information that they shouldn't. So I think it's going to be really important that companies kind of do a lot of education and training with users, how to use these tools and technologies, what to ask, what not to ask, what's okay, in your private life, but, not okay on your work computer. So I think we're going to be seeing a lot of stories in the headlines about, things that went wrong for quite a while until companies really figure out how to get a handle on all this.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, shall we move on to our final news story of the day, and that is RingCentral. RingCentral is, they announced earlier this week that they are doubling their headcount in India. They've recently just been granted their carrier license in the region, and they're really going big in India, which is great to see. India, of course, a very young but fast growing economy as well, very large population. What do our panel think of this? Should we go to Evan first? What do you think of this story, Evan? And this part of the world being maybe a new mecca for UC vendors.
Yeah, it's a really bright spot for RingCentral. I'm reading here on UC Today, they're doubling their headcount from 200 to 400 over the next year, which in our space is a big number. So traditionally, India has had a pretty tightly regulated environment around calling and collaboration within India. And this really opens them up to be the really fully compliant cloud phone services across the country and globally, within the Department of Telecom in India, which is a big move. I mean, traditionally, you've had lots of PBXs and legacy communication systems. So this is a leap in the right direction. And India's economy is on fire. They've got an amazing talent pool and tons of energy in the innovation economy. And this is only going to kind of ride on top of that wave. Super exciting. And it kind of ties into RingCentral's financial growth plans, which are biggest and brightest outside of the U.S. So I think that's where they're looking for growth and opportunity.
I was actually a little surprised when I saw this, just because India is so tightly regulated and so much of the telecom business flows through companies like Reliant and Tata. I would have thought that if Ring were to get in, it would be through some wholesale agreement with one of those companies. And so, we could imagine like Tata Cloud Office or something like that, but they're coming in with the Ring brand. And that perhaps even signals a bit of a shift in the way India looks at doing business. Instead of forcing everyone to run through one of a handful of very well-known tech companies in India, open it up a little more and create some better innovation. And so this is certainly a feather in the cap for Ring. I mean, you said it's a massive, massive country with huge opportunity. Ring does very well with small and mid-sized businesses, which is what India is filled with. And and for them to be able to come in without having, for them to get regulatory approval to sell there, I mean, that must have taken a tremendous amount of heavy lifting. So congratulations to that team there.
Yeah, of course, I have to agree with that. And, it's great that they're the first. Of course, they're not going to be the only one. I read something recently, Microsoft Teams Phone is soon going to be available in India. But that is, to Zeus, your point, that is based on working with partners and local operators. So the fact that Zoom is going in directly without doing, this handoff type of thing or partnership is, really great. I also read, Vonage is going to be doing something. Vonage is opening an R&D center of excellence in India. So I would expect to see, Vonage trying to do similar things. It might take a bit longer, but, certainly RingCentral is the first, but not the last to be doing this type of thing. But it's great the way it is opening things up, and hopefully maybe an analyst conference in India for some of us soon.
Yeah, first mover advantage is big, though.
Yes, totally agree.
Absolutely, and I can concur that actually that tallies with our audience growth rate as well. India is one of the fastest growing segments of our audience, so there's clearly appetite, for these kind of moves to happen ongoing. So, look, I think that's a really fantastic place to end today's discussion. I'd like to say thank you to Evan, Blair, and Zeus. Thank you so much for joining me and sharing your insights as always.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. You've been watching me, David Dungay, on UC Today. See you next time.